Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all had a good weekend. I was able to work over the weekend, but I caught something. So if I'm not making much sense today, please let me know. My brain's a little fuzzy. So if I make less sense than usual, let me know. So we'll have a review session, but before we do that, I got to talk a little bit, finish up chapter 8. So we talked about these Vikings. Right, we talked about how you had the Vikings attacking Europeans. And that's kind of one theme we had during this Dark Ages, these problems with all these invasions that Europeans are suffering. And the Vikings actually came out and invaded for a variety of reasons. One was that there was actually population pressure in Northern Europe. Right, there's population pressure in Northern Europe. And that's forcing Vikings out to go in and attack European monasteries. There's a lack of other resources too. For example, there's not enough food in Northern Europe, and that's causing Vikings to go out and to seek resources elsewhere. They're sometimes also pushed out by kings who are more powerful than them. There's some Vikings who are just pushed out by these more powerful kings who have to go out and make their living as bandits, basically, on the sea. And also one thing we just want to stress from that video was that sometimes people are just bad. You may remember I showed that video, meant to be a funny clip about it. And they talked about how Vikings, remember the Vikings are fighting, killing monks. The monk comes in and stops them and says, "Why are you guys doing this?" And it gives all these reasons. And then one of the Vikings says, "Oh, now I remember. Killing people is fun, and it's easy to take stuff from monks." Right? Killing people is fun, and it's easy to take stuff from monks. You had this idea that sometimes people are just bad. And in order to try and deal with that, you had people like this guy, King Alfred. Remember, he's the guy, he actually goes to Rome. He's supposed to be the next king of England. He goes to Rome. The Pope in Rome crowns him king of England. And then with Catholicism, with this growing English identity of Roman culture, he goes back and fights the Vikings and actually defeats them and helps establish a unified England. But these Viking attacks are going to spur on this thing called feudalism. This is why. Where the Vikings have these ships, they're called longboats. And these ships are really interesting because not only are they able to go across the ocean, they can also sail up rivers. And they can attack any city along a river, any monastery, any town along a river. And that's a problem because that's typically where you build towns and cities and monasteries, is along rivers. So these guys are a big threat. And they'll attack the monks, they'll attack the city, and then they'll kill a bunch of monks, they'll kill a bunch of people, take their stuff, get on their boat, and escape before anyone can do anything. Right? They'll escape before anyone can do anything about it. And so this is a problem. How do you help people to respond quickly? If a monastery is under attack and you have to go all the way to the king to get him to send soldiers to defend the monastery, by the time they get there, the Vikings will be gone. But as you can tell in this picture, these are Frankish knights. These are the same kind of guys that are going to help defeat the Moors at the Battle of Tours. They're going to help defeat them. They're showing up on time. They're actually here to get those Vikings. And what made that possible was a new system of government called feudalism. And I gave you this example. If I'm king, I have all these different lords. And I give the lords land. I give all these different lords land. And it's their duty, in exchange for this land, to give me military service. Right? I give them this property, and they give me in return military service. So this is how this works. And then their job is they use that land to support a group of soldiers, such as those knights we just saw. And then the key thing is they live on their land. So the soldiers go out and live on that land. And then if the Vikings attack, they'll be there and ready. They'll be there and ready to deal with them. And this system works. By decentralizing power, by giving putting these lords everywhere, giving them land, having them live on the land and raise soldiers to fight the Vikings, we're able to stop the Viking attacks. And that's what you saw in that picture. Now the people who were, and so you have kings who give the land to lords, and those lords will often give some of that land to knights. But then you have these group of people called serfs who actually work the land. The serfs, here's the key thing, serfs are in between slaves and free people, right? Being a serf is better than being a slave, but not as good as being completely free. Serfs were not property. They could marry who they wanted, and they had a lot of freedom to work the land as they wanted. They didn't have an overseer looking over their shoulder telling them what to do. So that was kind of a good thing about being a serf. You were better off than a slave. Slaves weren't always allowed to marry. If they did get to marry, they didn't necessarily get to choose who they were going to marry, and people could buy and sell them, even if they were married. Right? If you were traditionally a slave and you were married and had children, your master could take your children, could take your wife, take your husband, and sell them. You couldn't do that to a serf. You could not do that to a serf. A serf was not property, so they had certain basic rights that slaves lacked. So it's better to be a serf than a slave, but at the same time, they had to work for their lord a certain number of days for free every year. They had to pay fees to their lords. And I don't expect you to remember all those things. What I want you to remember, though, is that a slave is not a serf. Slaves and serfs are not the same thing. They are different things. And you would much rather be a serf than being a slave, but of course it's much better to be free than to be a serf. Now, in feudalism, the loyalty is to a person, not an institution. You swear loyalty not to England, you swear loyalty to the King of England. Right, this is different from how we see things. In the United States, it doesn't matter who our president is, we're still loyal to our country, whoever the president is. But in this system, your loyalty is not focused on an institution, it's focused on a person. And that can cause a problem. As long as the king is powerful, he can keep his nobles in line. But if the king dies, like let's say I'm the king and I die, my 6-year-old son is my heir, he's supposed to be the next king. Lords are not going to listen to a 6-year-old kid. Right? They're going to do what they want. So that's kind of a problem in this sense, in that because the loyalty is to the person, not an institution. And because the lords have all this power, they have their land and they live on that land, they can disobey the king if they get strong enough. Right? They can disobey the king to get strong enough. Those same knights and soldiers they have to fight the Vikings can also be used to fight their king if they so choose. So it's easy for the nobles to become more powerful than the king. That's kind of a problem with feudalism. But it does work. It does get rid of the Vikings. Now attached to feudalism is another ism called manoralism. The base word is this word manor. I don't know if you've ever seen like an old Batman TV show. They'll say, when Bruce Wayne would go home, they would go, Bruce Wayne returns to stately Wayne Manor. It means his mansion. Right? It's similar to the word mansion. But oftentimes it was also a castle. Remember I said in feudalism, the nobles, the knights, go live on the land with the serfs. So this is related to feudalism. In manoralism, it's an economic system in which lords and serfs live on the land, or they reside on the land that they live off of the land that they reside on. So the land that they live in is where they also make their living. And it's built around the manor house, which is where the lord lives. And a lot of times it's a castle. So the center of this, you can see right here, manor house. That's the center of it. Or like I said, also the castle. And these systems, these tend to be self-sufficient. These tend to be self-sufficient. They grow enough food to feed their people. They're able to make their own clothing. They're able to produce wine and other goods. The only thing they can't make are luxury goods, things like silk or something like that. But for the most part, they're able to make what they need, so they tend to be autonomous and independent. They tend to be autonomous and independent because they're self-sufficient. They produce what they need, so they're able to be independent. So during this period, there's not a lot of trade and communication between these different units. There's not a lot of trade between different European regions at this time. It's not necessary. These little manor houses, these are all self-sufficient. So they don't need to trade. So there's not a lot of trade, not a lot of communication. Now these things get really big. By 800, the year that Charlemagne will be crowned king, there's over 60% of people living in Europe are serfs. Right? And this system is connected to serfs. It's the serfs who work the land. And one thing I want to emphasize, by having all this attention given to the land, by having since everything's self-sufficient, there's an interest in improving productivity. And they're going to develop, I won't go into the details because it's a little complex, but they're going to develop this thing called the three-field system, which is basically where you plant the fields at different time periods and you leave one field to rest. You have 3 fields, one rests, one you plant in one period of the year, one you plant in another period of the year, and you rotate it. And that actually increases productivity, that increases the yield of the land. All I want you to remember is that this manorialism system, I said it has this autonomous and independence aspect of it because these are self-sufficient communities. There's not a lot of trained communication, but it leads to agricultural productivity. This system is going to make a lot of food, which is going to lead to the population to grow. And that's as far as we're going to get with that lesson. We'll now turn to the review session. So, just a few things to talk about briefly. Remember, the test is on Wednesday. I said this before, but I think it bears warrant to repeat it. Especially in the multiple choice, trust yourself. What I mean by that, your first instinct is generally correct. On the multiple choice, your first instinct is generally correct. To give you an extreme example of it, I had this happen over and over again when I was reviewing people's tests. Many people actually had the right answer. And I could see it where they had the right answer and they erased it. In one case, a student missed 5 multiple choice questions. That student, he had gotten the correct answer on all 5 of those, erased it, and circled another one. So don't do that. Trust yourself. Don't let the test psych you out. Unless you can think of a good reason, don't change your answer. I don't feel like it's the right answer is not a good reason. Right? Only change the reason if you come with only change the answer if you can come up with a rational reason for why. Don't second guess yourself. You're usually going to be wrong if you change an answer just because of your feeling. Okay, don't worry about when you finish your test in comparison to other people. I had several students who felt rushed when they took their exam. No one took the whole time. They didn't feel rushed because I said you have to finish up. They felt rushed because other people finished the test and they thought, okay, I need to finish the test too. You have the whole period. I'm fine. I'll wait till the end of it. It's okay. But don't think just because a lot of people are finishing that you need to be done too. I can tell you, I've been grading tests for years. I've not seen any correlation between when someone finishes a test and their grade. Sometimes the first people are done get A's, sometimes they don't. Sometimes the last people that get done get A's, sometimes they don't. I haven't seen anything. So don't feel pressured because other people are finishing that you need to be done. Take your time. You have the whole period. Usually I have to close the door because it's a little noisy. If I do end up closing the door, I'll give you a reminder on that day. Please, when you leave, close it quietly. These doors slam very loudly, and that distracts the people still taking the test. Still make appointments for tutoring. I think the tutor said he would be until starting at 3 p.m. today, so if you want to get tutored, go see him. For those who are, excellent, just keep it up. We'll see as we start the review session. There's a tendency, and this makes sense, this is perfectly logical. Most people have questions about the older material. Right? Most people are going to have questions about the older material. That's good to focus on that material, but don't forget to look at the new material. Sometimes people will focus so much on the old material that they won't focus on the new stuff. So please make sure you look at everything. And you can see this, right? I bolded all the questions people asked. Every question on the Greek experience someone asked. So people obviously make sense. This is the oldest material. People are like, I don't remember that too well. I want to talk about that. And that's fine, but don't forget to talk about the new stuff. So how did Greek geography shape Greek civilization? What's the major geographical feature of Greece? Mountains. Right? Mountains. So that's the key thing, first of all, just remember the big thing we focused on were mountains. So how did mountains lead to political unity or political disunity? Disunity. Right, remember you had mountains. That leads to political, I'll say division, that sounds a little better than disunity. But was Greek culture generally unified or generally divided? Culture. It's generally unified. And remember, the kind of image I tried to give you to help remember that, it's hard to lead an army over a mountain. It's hard to lead an army over a mountain. That's not an easy thing to do. It's hard to lead an army over a mountain and conquer your neighbor. And so that creates political division. On the other hand, it's not really that hard to walk over a mountain to visit your neighbor. And if you visit your neighbor, you're going to have a shared culture. Right? You can visit your neighbor, have a shared culture. So Greek geography, mountains, political division, cultural unity. Okay, what happened to the pre-Greek civilizations that were located on what is now Greece? Are they still here? No, they're gone. They destroyed each other. It was the Mycenaeans and the Minoans. I won't ask you those names on the test, but they destroyed each other. Yes, Jilorian? Yeah, exactly. For the details, the Minoans had that bad earthquake, and that weakens them, and the Mycenaeans say, okay, let's invade the Minoans and get rid of them. Yeah, excellent. No, it's good you remember that.
So we don't have to know their names?
No, that's not on the term list, so I won't ask you those names particularly. Okay, what were the values of the Greek heroic age? Okay. Remember, here we are. We have the. This is the slide that I think is important to know. Remember, notice that when they talked about this guy Homer, who was this famous poet, and the Greek heroic age virtues can be found in things like the Iliad and the Odyssey, which a lot of you had to read when you were in high school. So you can kind of think back to that experience. And these are essentially war stories, right? They're essentially war stories. So one of the most important heroic age values is war. Is victory in war. Right, victory in war. Did they have lots of rules for warfare, or was it anything goes? Anything goes. Right? You have to win. Do what you need to do to win. Remember I showed you that clip of remember the little Spartan boy who was caught stealing? They weren't angry that he was stealing, they were angry because he got caught. Right? Do what it takes to win. You're not in trouble because you stole, you're in trouble because you got caught stealing. You gotta learn to be clever. So Greek men are expected to be victorious in war by any means necessary. Are their enemies the only thing they're supposed to conquer? Women, yes, thank you, Laura. They're also supposed to be victorious in romance. Men should try and have as many romantic relationships as possible. They're supposed to conquer in the battlefield and in the bedroom. Are women supposed to do the same thing? No, right. Women are supposed to be loyal wives, wise mothers. Right? Women are supposed to be loyal wives, wise mothers. And you can especially see this if you read the Odyssey, right? You have this guy, Odysseus, who goes, he's trying to get back home. He spent 10 years trying to get back home. During that time period, he kills a lot of people, and he has a lot of romantic relationships. Right, if you remember that story. And then his wife, Penelope, the whole time, she has all these guys trying to marry her, and she refuses them constantly. Right? He is supposed to be this guy who can win by any means necessary, defeat his enemies, win in the bedroom. She's supposed to be a loyal wife, wise mother to their son, Telemachus. Any questions there? Those are not the virtues of the Greek philosophers. Remember, the Greek philosophers are going to be different. Socrates, I had that out of order, I'm sorry. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Remember SPA. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. That's not their virtues, right? Remember, Socrates says, Remember I showed you that video about Socrates? He had the opportunity to escape. What did he do?
Ask why.
Yeah, he asked why. Why should I? He didn't escape. Right? He thought it was better to do the right thing than to die. So these are very different from those heroic age values. So if you look at the order, right, you have Socrates. Why does he die? He's so annoying because he always asks, right, he always asks questions, he always asks why. Plato was interested in another P word. Right. Plato in politics, Socrates starts asking why. That's the basis of kind of Western philosophy and Western thinking. Plato uses that kind of idea of asking questions to focus on politics. He writes that book, The Republic. Aristotle, he focuses on anything, or all, or everything. All those will work. Right? Aristotle is going to focus on, that's terrible writing. Aristotle is going to focus on anything, or all things. He's going to try and use reason to understand the world around him. He's going to try and use reason to understand the world around him. Not just politics. Not just politics. Okay, what form of government did Athens have? A democracy. Right? Athens had a democracy. This is the kind of democracy it had. In particular, what I want you to know is that it was a widespread democracy. Where all male citizens over the age of 30 could vote. In Athens, all male citizens over the age of 30 could vote. So this is a very powerful, very widespread democracy. Now, it's important in Athens because that's, of course, where we look to, the United States. If you're an American, that's where we're looking to for our government, a large part. Right? There was no Athenian democracy. There probably wouldn't be any American democracy. That's where our founding fathers were looking to. Okay, how did democracy strengthen Greek city-states? To answer this question, it helps to remember I showed you the video from the movie 300, where the guys were fighting each other. You had the Spartans versus the Persians, and they're killing each other, but the Spartans were much better at killing Persians than Persians were killing the Spartans. Does anyone remember why?
They were more together, their formation.
Yeah, exactly. They knew how to fight together. They were unified. And what united them was their democratic traditions. Even though that movie talks a whole lot about Leonidas being king, in fact, it's important to remember Sparta also has democratic institutions. And those democratic institutions help to unite these people into one strong unit that could work together. Remember, the people in these democracies, the people who make the decisions to fight the wars, are the ones who actually fight the wars. The people voting whether or not we go to war against the Persians were the ones who were going to take up weapons and go fight. So of course that's going to unify them, right? We made this decision together, we're going to go carry it out together. So this is going to help these small little Greek city-states that don't have that many people stand up and defeat Persia, this gigantic empire. Democracy, by giving you unity, also gives you strength. And because the Greek city-states are able to unite to defeat Persia, people are going to say, okay, democracy does make you stronger. Again, if they had not have defeated Persia, the United States would probably not be a democracy. Let's see. So that, in a part, that answers question 6, was the historical significance of the Greek victories against the Persians is it makes democracy survive. Okay. Clear off some space on the board. Ah! Just kind of jumped out of my hand. I'm sorry? Number 6? Right. That if they had not have won, the Greek city-states win, that allows democracy to survive. That allows democracy to survive. And of course, that allows countries to become democracies later, such as the United States. Also, of course, that allows for room for the Greeks to develop Greek philosophy. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle will all come after these wars. If they had been conquered, they maybe wouldn't have come up with Greek philosophy. Which Greek philosophy emphasizes reason. Reason helps eventually lead to logic and to science. So what were the Peloponnesian Wars? First of all, who fought in the Peloponnesian Wars? What was one side? Athens and Sparta. Yeah, it's Athens versus Sparta. Who wins? Sparta. This is important because Athens was under Pericles. Athens was trying to build an empire that eventually, hopefully, or from their hopes, would unite the Greek world. The Spartans defeat them. So that prevents a unified Greece. It prevents a unified Greece. Sparta, even though it can defeat Athens, can't unify Greece. It doesn't unify Greece. So Greece is going to stay disunited. Greece is going to stay divided. Instead of becoming like a super democracy or something like that, they're not able to unite. Now, that brings us to Alexander. I just need to check this. Okay. So these last few questions, I'm really focusing on the PowerPoints, and we went back, so I won't come back here. I just want you to know for questions 8, 9, for Xerxes, Themistocles, Thermopylae, and Alexander, I'm just going to go through the PowerPoints, so I don't have to keep coming back and forth. Yes, Justin?
For number 7, were they fighting in those wars because they both wanted to unite Greece?
Sparta wasn't particularly as interested, I think, as Athens was. It was the Athens were trying to build an empire that was threatening Sparta, and so Sparta reacted to kind of defend what they had. Yes, Emily?
Okay, I'm still confused on question 6.
Which one?
6.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Number 6.
Number 6.
Just about that one.
Okay, Sparta wins. Sparta wins the war, but it can't unite Greece.
Is this 6 or 7?
This is 6.
Okay.
So that leaves room. I'm sorry, that's 7. I'm sorry, that's 7. You're asking, this is where my not being healthy kicks in. You're asking about 6.
Yes, sir.
What is the historical significance of the Greek victories against the Persians? Democracy. It allows democracy to survive. Allows democracy to survive. And it also allows for the development of Greek philosophy. Also allows the development of Greek philosophy. Which of course leads to eventually to logic and science. So, Alexander, if I talk to you on the triad or something like that, or if he appears in the triad or in the terms, it won't say Alexander the Great, it'll just say Alexander. But you want to remember him as Alexander the Great. That'll help you answer the question. First of all, Alexander's interesting. He's not Greek, he's Macedonian. Macedonia is a region north of Greece. But they're influenced by Greek culture. They're influenced by Greek culture. Alexander builds on his father's military advances and goes out and conquers. He takes over Greece, he takes over Persia, and even gets all the way to India. He builds this gigantic empire. So he unites Greece and took much of Persia by 330, and his conquests continue. Now the thing about Alexander is that he dies very young. He's only 33 when he dies. His son is too young to inherit the kingdom, and so his empire is divided. His empire gets divided up. Now, what happens though is his empire is ruled by Greek kings. Right? When his empire falls apart, the people who rule each part of the empire are Greek kings. That means that Greek culture is now going to spread in those areas. Right? Greek culture is now going to spread in those areas. If Alexander the Great wouldn't have made all these conquests, the New Testament would not have probably been written in Greek. Right? That's to give you an idea of the significance of this. Because he wins all these wars, because he builds this great empire, even though it's divided, the people who are going to rule are still going to be Greek. They're going to spread Greek language and Greek culture, and of course eventually Greek philosophy. They're not going to spread democracy, though. Alexander is an emperor. His successors are kings. You don't elect kings. Right? So they're not going to be spreading democracy. They're going to spread Greek culture and Greek language and Greek philosophy, but not democracy. I should point out one thing, too. When you're thinking of preparing for the triads, one thing I look for are themes. I want to find people that can go together. One possible triad may be based around people who conquer. People like Alexander the Great, who goes around conquering, making an empire. Okay, people ask questions about these two guys. How do you tell their thought apart? And I wanted to include them because I think they have two different Greek answers for a kind of deep question about how we should orient our lives. I think it's good to remember them. And one way to remember the first guy is PE. Right? I'm sure you remember when you were a kid, PE, right? Gym class. I'm sure you remember gym. Okay, this guy Epicurus believed in pleasure. He said, we don't know, or actually he said, we're just made of atoms. When we die, that's it. There's no afterlife or anything like that. So since there's no afterlife or anything like that, you should live your life now for the pursuit of pleasure. You should live your life now for pursuit of pleasure. And like I said, his name is Epicurus. So we should live our life for the pursuit of pleasure. The way you could think about him as like a guy wearing a toga. You know, he's Greek, so he wears a toga. And he's running. Because he likes to run. He likes to run for pleasure. PE, gym, running, pleasure, Epicurus. It's silly, but it will help you remember, hopefully. You can think of that in mind, this guy running, and you say, oh, Epicurus, yeah, he's the pleasure guy, PE, gym, I love to run. I hate to run, but as you can probably tell, but that will help. Epicurus apparently loved to run. At least I think he did. Zeno of Cyprus believed things very differently. He thought about virtue. He always talked about virtue. He thought virtue was very important. Maybe you could think of him this way. Zeno focuses on virtue that makes you go to sleep. Right? If someone just gets up and says, be good, be good, be good, it's kind of boring. So you fall asleep. Z, or when you sleep in the comic strip, you say Z. But as an aside, over the summer I teach a class on the history of comics. So you can tell I do that because I can't draw comics. So hopefully that'll help you remember Zeno, right? He's the guy who talks about virtue so much he bores you, you go to sleep. Epicurus, though, on the other hand, he loves to run. He goes on fun runs all the time. So PE, physical education. Another term on that list was Xerxes. Xerxes was a Persian emperor. And of course, when I talk about Persian emperors, what are they always doing? Invading Greece. They're always invading Greece. Right, pretty much any time they come up in this class, they're invading Greece. They didn't have a whole lot else to do, I guess. So we talked about King Xerxes. He's one of these emperors Persian emperors who are invading Greece. And he's the one that actually attacks Greece at the Battle of Thermopylae. Who won this battle? The Persians, yes. I always think it's funny. This is the movie that 300 is made after. They didn't win. I'm sorry, it's made after 300. 300 is based on this movie. It's supposed to glorify the Greeks, but the Greeks lose this battle. The Persians win this battle. The Greeks lose. The battle that's really important is this battle, Salamis. This battle, Salamis. You want to remember that word, Salamis, because it's the Greek victory that defeated the Persians essentially once and for all. Right? It's a Greek victory that defeats the Persians essentially once and for all. And it's based around this guy, Themistocles. It's based around this guy, Themistocles. Right, I'll tell you the story again, because hopefully it'll help you remember. Themistocles knew after the after the Persians invaded the first time, Themistocles said, they're coming back. They're going to come back. I know they're going to come back. We need to be ready. And Athens, he was from Athens. Athens discovered a whole bunch of silver. And initially the democracy was going to say, let's just give everyone a bunch of silver. And Themistocles said, that's a bad idea. We'll just waste the money. Let's use the money to build ships. So they're going to use that silver to build a lot of ships. Then the Persians invade. The Greeks don't know what to do. Someone goes to the oracle at Delphi. Remember, the oracle at Delphi is like I don't know, you could say like a psychic. She can talk to the gods. She can give you answers to your questions. And the oracle at Delphi says, take refuge behind the wooden wall. Take refuge behind the wooden wall. And of course, Themistocles said, yep, wooden wall. Our ships are made of wood. That's what she's talking about. And then he goes out and defeats the Persians in this battle. So that's another, I should just point out, that's another theme that could possibly be useful for triads. One is kind of this theme of conquest, like Alexander the Great going out conquering people. This is a theme more of defense, of resisting the invader. Themistocles is defending his country against an invader. So any more questions about Greece before we move on to Rome? Okay. So first question, how did the Senate respond to the demands of the plebeians? What does this tell us about the Roman Republic? This is a slide that has the demands of the plebeians. I'm not going to ask you to remember all these demands. What I want you to see, though, is that the plebeians are angry. They don't think, remember, the plebeians are like the common people. And they're asking for more power. And the government says, we're not going to give you more power. Or I'm sorry, they're asking for more power. How does the Senate respond to their demands for more power? Does it say yes or no? It says yes. The Senate, over time, will give the plebeians more power. And because of that, the republic won't be overthrown. People will continue to support for the republic and fight for the republic and be loyal to the republic. Because the republic is flexible. The republic is flexible. If someone doesn't have power, I'm sorry, backtrack. If someone, the republic is willing to change to reflect changing situations. The plebeians are growing in power, fine, we'll give them more power in the government. That way they'll support us, and it works. Right? They're able to expand, and they're able to integrate this expansion in part through citizenship. They're able to integrate this in part through citizenship. Now you'll also remember, for question 2, how did the Senate respond to the needs of Roman veterans who lost their land? Why is this important? Remember, these soldiers were off fighting the wars for Rome. The soldiers are off fighting the wars for Rome. But while they're off fighting, their families still have to live. And many of their families lost their land. They sold the land in order to feed themselves, or they borrowed against it. It was foreclosed on. So you had all these soldiers who went off to fight for Rome, came back and they didn't have land. And you'll remember, we talked about these guys, the Gracchus brothers. They're not on the term list, so don't worry about their names. But these Gracchus brothers came out and said, we need to give land to these soldiers who've lost their land. How do the Gracchus brothers, what happens to the Gracchus brothers then? Yeah, they get killed. The Senate kills them. So in contrast, the Senate made room for the plebeians. The Senate said, okay, we're going to let you plebeians have power. That helped the republic survive. Later, when it's time for the Senate to give some land to the Roman senators, they refuse. And when it comes time to give their land to the Roman veterans, the landless Roman veterans, they refuse. And this means that these veterans are not going to look to the Senate or the republic. They're going to look to their generals for help. The Senate won't listen to us. Maybe our generals will listen to us. And the general they look to in particular is Julius Caesar. Caesar is a very powerful general that the veterans are willing to follow. He comes into Rome and takes over. He basically comes in and takes over Rome. And under him, it's going to become a republic in name only. But you also want to remember, Julius Caesar gets assassinated. Right? He doesn't live to follow through on this. But he is going to be the one that essentially almost fatally weakens the republic. So why did the republic fall? It's in part related to question 2. Right? Because the republic was not willing to be flexible anymore. It was not willing to respond to the needs of the Roman people, these landless veterans. So those landless veterans changed their allegiance to Rome. From the Senate to the generals, particularly General Julius Caesar. Let's see. How did the Romans unite their empire, and why did some rebel against it? That's also related to number 6. What elements of culture did the Roman Empire bring? What was the dark side of that empire? I'm going to go through, I have some slides to show you, to review, that will help us remember that. First of all, one big thing I want to emphasize is the issue of citizenship in terms of integrating the empire. Citizenship. One thing the Romans did when they conquered someone was they would give many of the people citizenship. They would make them a part of the republic. So that led to widespread support. They didn't just conquer people and then beat them down. They conquered people but then said, you can be part of us. You can be equal to us. You can be citizens as well. So that's one aspect of citizenship. Another aspect is through engineering, or the aqueducts, these marvels of engineering that bring fresh water to people. If the Romans conquer you, they'll build you aqueducts. They'll also build roads. You may have heard the saying, all roads lead to Rome, because they build a lot of roads. So that's something that can help you, and that helps to integrate and unify the empire. And of course, they built baths. They had this wonderful culture of bathing. It's nice to take baths. It's nice to be around people who regularly take baths. The Romans had it up to an art form where not only did you get it clean, did it keep you clean, it was also very enjoyable. This was like going to a spa. And this, by the way, I want to point out, this picture is of a bath which is at the Roman city that was built in Britain. This isn't in Italy. This is from Britain. When the Romans took over Britain, they built baths. And this bath was built in the city of Bath, which shows you how important these things are. Now that's kind of the nice thing. Citizenship, Roman culture of baths, aqueducts. That's the nice part. That's the, wow, that's a lot. That's the, how did Romans unite their empire? Right. Now why did some rebel against it? Well, remember they enslaved people and made them fight as gladiators. Right? They would enslave people, make them fight as gladiators in places like the Colosseum. And one thing I want to stress, when Romans practiced slavery, they were equal opportunists. They didn't care, in the United States, slavery was connected to race. Romans didn't care what color your skin was. They were happy to enslave you no matter what. So slavery here was very widespread and was based on, they didn't care, they were colorblind slavers, they would enslave anyone. And because of that, you had people like Spartacus who would rise up in rebellion. Spartacus was a gladiatorial slave. Spartacus was a gladiator who was a slave. He knew how to fight. He got a bunch of his fellow slaves who also knew how to fight, and they rose up in rebellion against Rome. And there's what happened to them. They all got crucified. Another kind of dark side about Roman life, I talk about kind of the good things, it's also important to remember the bad things. Roman family life. It was very much dominated by the father. Right? The word patriarchy comes from the Roman word for father. Also the word patriotism as well, fatherland. And one aspect of that was this, and I don't show pictures like this to gross people out, I show them to help us remember this. Remember, they practiced widespread infanticide. And these are the skeletons of 2 baby girls who were killed, or I should say were abandoned and just died. I mean, if you leave a baby alone, they're going to die. So this is this kind of cruel aspect. Now, there was another question on there, was what was the relationship between Christianity and Greek philosophy? One thing we have to stress, remember I said the New Testament is written in Greek. Oh yes, Laura?
Wait, I thought that we could.
Did I skip one?
That out.
No, not this one. That was one I added. Yeah, I apologize. No, I had to, there's some I took out, but I added that one to make up for the things I had to take out.
It was actually originally on there.
Yeah.
It was always on there. Okay. Well, it should stay on there.
So what else is Christian? 11 stays.
What is the relationship between Christianity and Greek philosophy? Yeah, that should stay on there. I sent another email. I apologize. I thought I had taken it off.
Yeah, I got the one where you took it off, but I didn't get the one that you took it off.
Okay, no, that one's on there.
Okay.
That one's on there. Yeah. So,
Okay.
my apologies.
Okay.
This is I was working over the weekend, but I was sick while I was working. So yeah, Jalorian?
Which one did you take off?
He didn't take one off.
I didn't take that one off. I didn't take anything off except for. Here, it'll take me a second. 108. Wow, that's a lot. 108. Basically, I took off everything after 7.
Yeah, this is the other side.
Right.
We got you. We got you.
I'm sorry?
It's all that matters.
Okay. So. All right. Yeah, I try and get the review sheet out early. The problem is, when I try and get it out early, I don't have as good of an idea of what's going to be on it. So please, thank you for your patience. Just let me know if there's any other questions. So there's this question: what is the connection between Greek philosophy and Christianity? And one thing we have to stress: remember that, like I said, the New Testament is written in Greek. They were borrowing Greek ideas. They had expressed themselves in Greek. That's why Jesus says, "I'm the Alpha and the Omega." I'm the A and the Z. That's the Alpha and Omega is the A and Z of Greek language. But Christianity is growing up as a minority religion within a culture that's dominated by Greek thought. Even though it's Rome, it's dominated by Greek philosophy. So Christians are actually friendly to Greek philosophy. And they're friendly to Greek philosophy because if they want people to convert to Christianity, they have to be able to explain it in terms that they can understand. Right? They have to be able to explain it in terms that they can understand, so they explain it in Greek terms. And this is important because it means that Christianity is going to be friendly to reason and to Greek philosophy, which is one reason why it's going to be in European countries that are primarily Christian, that science will develop, the scientific method will develop. Some of the terms, one of the terms is this lady, Boudicca. You can kind of remember her, she's the two B's, Boudicca and Britain. Boudicca and Britain. When the Romans invaded Britain, they took over Britain. Boudicca's family her husband was actually a king. And he accepted Roman rule. He accepted Roman rule because aqueducts, roads, culture, citizenship, all that wonderful stuff. Right? He accepted that. However, when he died, she expected that the government would recognize her then as queen. She expected that the Roman government would then respect her as king, or as queen. They didn't do that. Instead, they whipped her publicly, and Romans raped her 2 daughters. And they said, "You're not queen anymore." So because of that Roman cruelty, she raised up a rebellion. So similar to Themistocles, she's trying to fight an invader, but she fails. Right? Themistocles is successful in defeating the Persians and protecting Greek civilization. She fails. She's not able to push the Romans out. So she's another one of these people trying to fight off an invasion. Another person that we talked about was Augustus. Augustus, you'll recall, is the nephew of Julius Caesar. That's one reason he gets power. So after Julius Caesar is assassinated, Augustus kind of takes over Caesar's spot, and he ends up fighting Mark Antony and Cleopatra. He gets in a big war with Mark Antony and Cleopatra, which he wins. So similar to Alexander the Great, he's going to be establishing an empire. Right? He wins this war similar to Alexander the Great. He's establishing an empire. And in this empire, he's going to use the Senate He's not going to get rid of it, but Rome is going to cease being a republic in the true sense of the word. It's going to be an empire ruled by him, the emperor, under the title of first citizen. He takes that title so that he looks like he's respecting the republic, but first citizen still means he's in charge. He's going to make a lot of reforms. He's going to use the Senate, win the loyalty of the army, and help poor people to get their support. And then he's going to use that then to expand the empire. Right? He's going to expand the empire. And to unify the empire, another thing he's going to try and do to unify the empire is to make people worship who? Him. He's going to try and make people to worship him in an effort to unify the empire. Which, of course, is what gets the Christians into trouble. Remember, the Christians are going to refuse to sacrifice to the emperors. They're going to be seen as rebels, and so they're going to be killed. Okay, some people ask questions about Paul. Right, Paul. Remember, first of all, Paul starts off as, I'm not going to ask you this on the test, his name, but his first name is actually Saul. His name is Saul. He later will change his name to Paul. When he's Saul, he is a Hebrew, he's a Pharisee, and he's actually persecuting Christians. He goes up arresting Christians and even killing a few Christians. However, he has a conversion experience and becomes a Christian. And then he becomes a very important Christian missionary. Right, he's going to spread Christianity around. Something like almost half the New Testament is written by Paul. It's written all these letters from Paul to various Christian communities. Now, he becomes a missionary when there's a conflict within Christianity. And the conflict is whether or not Christians need to become Jews first. So if you're someone who's a Gentile, if you're a non-Jewish person and you want to become a Christian, do you have to become a Jew first? Or can you just directly become a Christian? That's important, because if you have to become a Jew first, if you're a man, that means you have to be circumcised. And you also have to follow a bunch of dietary rules. You have to follow a bunch of different laws. You don't have to do that, though, if you can just become a Christian directly. Paul is going to say you can become a Christian directly. You can become a Christian directly. You don't have to become a Jew. He's going to win. And that's very important because that will lead to the expansion of Christianity. Right? People are going to say, hey, I can believe in God without following all these rules. I'm going to do that. Now, on this one, someone asked me about the Gnostics. I don't expect you to remember the Gnostics. I just wanted to talk a little bit about them because we went over, because they were mentioned in the documentary. The two people I want you to focus on, you have this guy Marcion. Marcion is a Christian, but he doesn't like all the Gospels. He only likes Luke. He says, I only believe in the Gospel of Luke. And he even edits that Gospel, and he only wants some of the letters that are there. So he gets rid of Luke. Other Christians, like this guy Irenaeus of Lyon, who's a bishop, says, no, we have to accept 4 Gospels. We have to accept 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And of course, he's the guy that wins. Right? He's victorious. His view is followed. And that's why if you pick up a Christian Bible today, you find Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay, the last chapter. Yes, Madison.
The question, why was Jesus executed? I saw it was.
Oh, I'm sorry, thank you. Yes, okay, why was Jesus executed? Okay, remember, during this time period in 1st century Judea, aka Israel, there's a lot of conflict. There's conflict between the Romans who have taken over Israel and Hebrew people. And there's conflict amongst Hebrews over what they should do about the Romans. And many Hebrew people think there's going to be a Messiah that's going to come and help them restore independence to their country. There's going to be a Messiah who's going to come and help restore independence to their country. And this Messiah, translated into Greek as Christ, and in English is King. So along comes Jesus, who people say is the Messiah. The Romans hear the word Messiah, they think Christ, they think King. They're afraid that Jesus is a rebel. Now Jesus did not plan a rebellion. Jesus did not criticize the Roman Empire. But because there was this time of conflict and fear of rebellion, he was seen as a rebel by the Romans and executed. Does that make sense, Madison? Is that
Oh yeah, I just thought it was highlighted. So.
Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, I didn't want to miss that one. Okay, why did the Germanic kingdoms adopt Catholic Christianity and Roman culture? Here's the slide. Remember, the Germanic kingdoms basically almost had like a Neolithic, a Stone Age level organization. It was based around families who were basically warriors. They didn't know how to administer governments all that well. They didn't even know how to read and write. So this meant they didn't last very long. These kingdoms were always rising and falling. To form long-lasting kingdoms, you need officials, you need bureaucracy who can administer, and you need learning. You also need legitimacy so people will be loyal. And when you think of that, the example I like to give is Charlemagne. He was a Germanic king. He was crowned Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope in the year 800. If the Pope crowns you, the logic, if you're Catholic, is, well, therefore God wants you to be king. I can't rebel against you whether you're strong or weak because God wants you to be king. So what happens is, in order to deal with these problems, they need to deal with their lack of organization, their lack of literacy. They need these things: officials, bureaucracy, learning, and legitimacy. They'll turn to Roman culture and Christianity to give those things. And remember, I used that metaphor of marriage. Right? The Germanic kingdom is going to marry the Catholic Church because they each need each other. The Germanic kingdoms will protect the church, will give resources to the church, help build monasteries and things like that. And the church will give them education, administration, bureaucracy, and legitimacy, so people will be loyal. That was an example of that, kings and monks. Charlemagne, I just want to talk about him briefly. He's one of these Frankish Germanic kings. Charlemagne's particularly important because he's going to be crowned Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope, and he's going to really expand his empire. He's going to become known as the father of Europe, in part because of this marriage alliance. But he's another example of these great conquerors. He's similar to Augustus. He's similar to Alexander the Great. They're building these empires. And his grandfather, Charles Martel, is a little different. Whereas Charlemagne is a great conqueror, Charles Martel, like Boudicca and like Themistocles, is going to be famous for defending his country. Right? Defending his country. And who does he defend his country against? Because of the noun?
Muslims.
Right, the Muslim Moors. You can think of it almost like Eminem. He defends his country against the Muslim Moors. If he would have been defeated, then Europe may have become Muslim instead of becoming Christian. Yes, Laura?
Okay, so who's defending?
Martel is the one defending, right? He defeats the Muslims who are invading Europe at the Battle of Tours. Constantine, and Charles Martel, therefore, is more like Boudicca, more like Themistocles. They're people who are trying to defend their civilizations. His grandson, Charlemagne, is more like Alexander the Great, is more like Augustus, who are expanding their empires and trying to use religion and other things to make their empire last. Alexander the Great doesn't really use religion. Maybe that's one reason his didn't last. So, any other questions? Right? Well, I'm going to try and upload this on YouTube. I'll send out an email later today if I do that successfully. See you all on Wednesday. Good luck. Remember, when you sit down for the test, please keep a space between you and your neighbor.